Hello driving intelligence community. Welcome to part 4 of my series on the 97 through 99 Deville. In this episode I'm going to be replacing Bank 1 Sensor 1 oxygen sensor. This sensor is located behind the engine against the firewall. It's pointing straight up. It's impossible to get to from underneath the vehicle. So with a lot of significant steps, which can be done if you're committed to getting this done, you can reach that from the top of the engine. This sensor had not actually failed. I was doing a lot of other work on the vehicle, and with 140,000 miles on the clock, I asked the owner if they were okay with me replacing this sensor. Most of these sensors will start to fail or slow down 50 to 100,000 miles. So this one was way past its prime. In fact, the Bank 2 Sensor 1 oxygen sensor had failed 10,000 miles ago. I feel like maintenance activities like this that should have been engineered out, or at least the maintenance activity improved from the engineering team, are one of the reasons why these vehicles' resale value is going down and down and down. I can't even begin to imagine what maintenance repair shops would charge to replace this oxygen sensor. You know, you can get these sensors online for $29, $30, but the labor cost is going to be prohibitive. So it's good for you to learn how to do this yourself. I still find that there's a big community that loves these cars. So if you're interested in replacing this sensor, follow along this video, and if you have any questions, please leave a comment below. Before we actually get into the repair video, I wanted to talk to you about a couple tools you're going to need that you won't readily find in your toolkit, or at least many people. The obvious tool that you will need is the O2 sensor removal tool, which allows you to span the wire and use a wrench or a ratcheting wrench while you're removing that. Another one that's unique to this is actually a tool. It's a turnbuckle, and what you'll need this for is to pull the engine away from the firewall. And you'll see how I've mounted this between the radiator support and the other mount on the engine for the torque strut. Pull the torque struts off. This goes in its place, and you need to make sure you get the proper measurement, but when you turn this, it will actually pull the engine forward, giving you more access. Without this, you cannot do this project. The other thing is, you've seen these types of hose clamps. You have to compress this side of it. They're extremely stiff. The ones that you screw are much easier to work with. This is very difficult. And in several places during this operation, where I'll talk about cooling hoses that need to be released, and also during a radiator replacement on this vehicle, you need a proper tool to remove these hose clamps. And that's why I've got a hose clamp pliers set. It gives you remote access through this piece to use a plier action to compress that clamp, that hose clamp, and get it off. The oxygen sensor is on Bank 1. It's considered Sensor 1 that I'm replacing today. It's at the back. And now for the bourbon bolt of the day. That one bolt that the automotive engineers wanted to make sure was as difficult as possible to drive you to the bar after you finished your maintenance activity. In a very tight place, in front of the air box, behind the valve cover. Cadillac GM did not do a good job designing this. First thing you got to do is take the torque straps off and put a turnbuckle here to pull the engine back to give you clearance. Once you have clearance, you've got to take the strut tower brace that goes all the way across. You've got to pull the coil packs. Then you've got to take the fan out of the air box. And then you've got some access down there to the oxygen sensor. But that's not everything. These two coolant hoses need to be loosened and pulled up. But to pull the bottom one up, you need to disconnect it, because on this Cadillac, the EGR line is blocking movement of this one. So it takes some finagling. On top of that, the only way I could get clearance on that bottom line was to disconnect this hose from the coolant reservoir after the coolant reservoir was taken out, and then pull this to pull the hose toward you. This gave access to get it out, but it was still quite a project. My recommendation, here's the old oxygen sensor on the left.
Here's the new one on the right. One of the reasons I had a hard time getting this out was because of this thicker shank on this oxygen sensor. Notice how narrow this is. It'll be much easier to get this tool on top of that than it was with this. I bought a Denso oxygen sensor for this vehicle. Again, it's Bank 1, Sensor 1. Same one for Bank 2, Sensor 1.
Once you get the oxygen sensor out, which is the hardest part, then it's just the reverse of all the steps that I've shown you in this video for reinstallation. And it's going to be especially much easier if you use a smaller shanked oxygen sensor, as I showed you earlier in the video. I mentioned Denso. They have a smaller shank. So easy to actually get down there with your hand, screw it in initially, and then use the oxygen sensor tool to tighten it up. And going through the reinstallation process.
After installing the O2 sensor with an appropriate amount of anti-seize, you'll want to reattach the two cooling hoses that were removed or relocated that were above the sensor. Then the HVAC fan will be reinstalled, and then you'll attach the coil packs as shown in the following.
When reinstalling your coil pack, remember there are 4 bolts. The back 2 are somewhat hard to get to. I had to pull 2 of the coil wires. But what I do, since you can't hold it and screw it at the same time, what I did is I taped the head of the bolt and put it into the socket, and then I can reach back here, and I can't show you with the video, but you can reach back and actually control this without having to fall into the engine. Here you can see I've got it into the hole, started, and there is a ground wire. You need to make sure you reattach that. It's very important. But this way, you don't have to hold it at the same time as you're screwing it.
Using the turnbuckle, you return the engine to its original position, reinstall the torque straps, the strut tower brace, the engine cover, and then the radiator cooling hose plastic shroud. After this is complete, you'll want to test it to make sure that any codes that you had have been cleared and that the oxygen sensor is operating properly. In this image, you see 4 fuel trim values. The top 2 are for short term and the bottom 2 are for long term. And at the bottom, you'll see the oxygen sensors oscillating. This is my test of this Deville. Let it run, get good and hot so that it was in closed loop, and you'll see that the fuel trim values are very close to 0, which is excellent, and that the oxygen sensors are oscillating properly. So this engine now is running properly and efficiently with its oxygen sensors.
So in closing, I just have one question. Did you notice my cool new hat? I could make these available to the driving intelligence community. I think it's pretty cool myself. So if there's any interest in these, leave a comment below. If I get enough interest, I can do a batch. This is a one-off right now just to see how it would come out. Thanks for watching.